This isn't just another story about a corporate crime. Think of it more as a strategic autopsy. Today, we're going to pull apart the Volkswagen emissions scandal, not just to go over the old headlines, but to really understand how a company's own incentives, its very identity, can end up designing its own downfall. We're looking for that flaw in the logic, that exact moment where a series of seemingly rational decisions led to a completely irrational disaster. The whole deception started with a pretty simple, almost clever engineering question. What if a machine was smart enough to know when it was being watched? What if it could tell the difference between the clean, predictable world of a lab and the messy, demanding reality of the actual road? This is the exact point where strategy started to drift away from ethics. And what if, when it sensed that it was being watched, it could just change its own behavior? Put on its best face for the inspectors and just politely behave itself. This wasn't some broken part. It was a choice, a decision, buried in millions of lines of computer code. A choice to show one version of the truth in the lab and a very different one out in the world. But only while the test was running. The second the car was back on a real road, boom, it switched back to its normal self, a self that was systematically breaking the very rules it just pretended to follow. That was the defeat device, and it was Volkswagen's secret answer to an impossible problem they had created for themselves. So just how big was this lie? Well, on the road, these so-called clean diesel cars were pumping out up to 40 times the legal limit of certain pollutants. Let me say that again, 40 times. This wasn't a rounding error. It was a complete betrayal of their brand, their customers, and the law. Now, here's what's so important to get from a strategic point of view. This was not the work of one bad apple. A lie on this scale, we're talking 11 million cars, can't be one person's fault. It was the predictable result of a corporate system that made a deeply unethical choice feel like the only logical way to survive. And that right there, that's the central question we're digging into. Was this just a classic corporate scandal, or was it something more chilling? The perfectly logical, almost inevitable result of the incentives Volkswagen itself created. To figure that out, we have to go back to the beginning. Okay, so our analysis starts back in the early 2000s. It starts with a corporate strategy that was built on an impossible promise. Volkswagen, this titan of German engineering, wanted to rule the world, and that mission put them on a direct collision course with reality. The directive from the very top was unambiguous. Become the #1 automaker in the world, period. To do that, they had to conquer the American market, and their weapon of choice for this invasion was clean diesel, a technology they promised would give you amazing performance and incredible fuel economy. The marketing pitch was genius. They told everyone you could have it all. A powerful car that was fun to drive, that sipped fuel that you could actually afford, and that met America's incredibly strict environmental laws. The problem wasn't the promise. It was physics. The engineering reality was that a diesel engine simply couldn't be all 4 of those things at the same time. To be truly clean, it needed expensive equipment that added cost and, worse, hurt the performance that made the cars so appealing. So the message from management down to the engineering teams was basically this. They were being asked to invent a mythical creature on an impossible deadline and do it on the cheap. That is a perfect recipe for a total system failure. The single biggest flaw in Volkswagen's entire strategy was this. The goals were set in the boardroom, and apparently nobody bothered to consult the laws of physics. The assumption was that reality would just bend to the company's will. It wouldn't. So this impossible promise creates this terrible dilemma for the engineers and managers on the ground. They are trapped inside a corporate culture that had basically removed any safe way to fail, or even to admit that failure was possible. When you can't solve the problem and you can't admit you can't solve it, your options get real narrow, real fast. The culture inside Volkswagen at the time was famously brutal. It was a top-down, authoritarian system that was obsessed with hitting targets. There was zero tolerance for bad news. So if you raised your hand and said, "I don't think this goal is possible," you weren't seen as being constructive. You were seen as a problem, as being weak. It was a career-ending move. So just imagine you're one of those engineers. You really only have 3 choices. Path 1, tell leadership the truth, that the clean diesel tech just isn't ready. In that culture, that's career suicide. Path 2, delay the whole project, lose the market to competitors, and miss all the company's growth targets. That's totally unacceptable. Which leaves path 3, find a creative way to redefine what success looks like. In a system that punishes honesty, the third path starts to look like the only path to survival. And so, they chose survival. And that choice led them to build an ingenious and deeply dishonest lie right into the heart of the machine. It was a silent partner in a massive crime. The software basically had two modes. When it sensed it was in a lab being tested, the wheels were spinning, but the steering wheel wasn't turning, it would switch on the full emissions control system. The car would pass the test, though its performance would drop. But the second it was back on a real road, the software turned all those controls off. Performance and fuel economy shot back up, and so did the illegal emissions. You can just imagine the kind of corporate doublespeak that let this happen. Inside the company, they didn't call it cheating. No way. They probably called it something sophisticated, like context-aware compliance. It's the kind of language that neutralizes the guilt and lets smart people keep doing their jobs without feeling like they're doing something wrong. And for almost a decade, the lie worked brilliantly. The whole system was rewarding the deception. Sales of diesel cars in America were soaring. Executives got massive bonuses. The company won Green Car of the Year awards. Regulators saw the passing grades and signed off. And customers loved their cars. Every single part of the system was telling them, keep doing what you're doing. And this gets to a fundamental truth about how organizations work. When success becomes mandatory, when failure is simply not an option, honesty has a way of becoming dangerously flexible. The system incentivized the outcome, not the integrity of how you got there. But you can't cheat reality forever. In 2014, a small group of researchers at West Virginia University, working on a tiny grant, decided to test the cars on an actual road. Their data just didn't make sense. Volkswagen denied and denied and denied, but the evidence was just too clear. By September of 2015, the company finally confessed, and the entire house of cards came crashing down. And the fallout was catastrophic. The price of that logical choice was far, far higher than the cost of just doing it right from the start. Over $30 billion in fines, 11 million vehicles recalled across the world, and real people, executives and engineers, faced criminal charges and some went to prison. So why does this story still matter so much today? Because Volkswagen's failure isn't just some old case study. It's a live fire warning for every leader in every boardroom right now. We can give this phenomenon a name: logical deception. It's what happens when a company's culture and its incentive plans become so twisted that doing something unethical becomes the most rational, logical choice for the people working there. They weren't bad people. They were good people responding perfectly to the signals of a bad system. And this brings us to the final and most important question. This one is for you. Look at your own organization. Are you setting impossible goals? Do you punish the people who bring you bad news? Because if you are, you might be setting the same trap for your own people. What is the impossible promise your strategy is built on? And is protecting that promise today actually destroying your company's future?